So this was in some ways revolutionary. It was a step along realizing the lay condition as a vocation in itself. One could use one's profession, in this case the martial art, in the service of the church. So it was taught that the crusade was a work of love, right? Like a mother chastising her child. And this is something that, an opposing injustice. It met the criteria for a just war, because there was a just cause, which was the liberation of the Christians from Muslim tyranny, liberation of the Holy Land. There was a legitimate authority, it was called by the Pope. It was a last recourse, nothing else was working, and the participants were encouraged to have an upright intention. So it was not only legitimate, it was something considered to be holy and meritorious. So you have in some ways a move from a just war. Just war had always been considered somehow tainted. Well, you went to war as a last recourse, but here it sort of changed into a just war. You were doing something meritorious by going to war and by striking a blow for the church. Now, conversion, forced or otherwise, was not part of the preaching of the First Crusade. It had no place in Urban's idea, nor did extermination of the infidel. He did not talk about killing all the Muslims or anything like that. It was to reconquer these places. Obviously, people were going to get killed. It was a war, but he did not tell them to exterminate the Muslims, nor did he tell them to baptize them with force. And in that sense, the modern jihad, which forced conversion on those who were not Jews or Christians, is different. The Christian holy war was not the same thing as the Muslim jihad. The crusade was also a brilliant political move, because at the time the emperor had set up an anti-pope. This happened many times during the Middle Ages. Whenever an emperor was not happy with the pope, instead of, and it's an interesting point from our talk yesterday on papal primacy, you'll notice that what happens in the Middle Ages, when a political power is not in agreement with the Pope or wants to oppose him, he doesn't deny the Pope's authority, but he doesn't set up another Pope. So if one was very clear the Pope was the head of the church, he would set up another Pope that this is the real Pope, you're not the real Pope. But nobody ever denied that the Pope was the head of the church. So there was an anti-Pope at this time, and so by preaching the crusade, Urban united Christendom behind himself, and he sort of isolated the emperor. The idea of holy war was reinforced by this experience of the First Crusade. They were spectacularly successful against odds, sometimes huge odds. There was a battle outside of Antioch. They must have been outnumbered 10-1, and yet they charged and they put the Muslims to flight. It's incredible when you read the battles that they went through. It was really something else. So only divine providence or sheer good luck. They also happened to hit the Holy Land at a time when there was a big rivalry between different Muslim groups. That helped, and divide and conquer. They were already divided. Once the Muslims reunited themselves, they were able to push the Christians out, but during the First Crusade, they were not united. Now, what about abuses? The Crusaders were not Boy Scouts or altar boys. They did commit grave injustices. The first wave of Crusaders in the First Crusade were not organized. They were sort of a loose band of soldiers that had gotten together. They didn't have, the leader was a monk who was leading them, but they didn't have no semblance of order, and they attacked Jews and Jewish communities on their way across Europe. The vendetta was part of the mentality of these warriors, and it was hard to disabuse them of that. So the Jews were attacked, believe it or not, because the Crusaders couldn't see the difference between Jews and Muslims. And for them, they were all they were all heretics. They were not even heretics, they were pagans. They were not, basically what would happen is this: they would land in a town, they would get drunk, and then one of them would say, there was a Jewish quarter in the town, and the one would say, look, why are we going all the way to the Holy Land when the people who crucified Christ are living right here? Let's get them. And so they would take their swords and they would attack the Jewish quarter of the town. So that happened in several different towns and cities on their way across Europe. The numbers have been exaggerated. I mean, you can read these, but there's a Jewish historian who's done a very thorough study of this phenomenon. And he points out that these numbers that are thrown around, like 10,000 Jews being killed by these crusaders, are way out. Most of the communities were only several hundred strong, and there were people killed, certainly dozens, maybe even hundreds of Jews were killed, but there were not thousands of Jews killed during these massacres. And interestingly enough, the first thing every single Jewish community did when they were being attacked was to go to the bishop. And the bishop, without exception, tried to protect them in each case against the Crusaders. In some cases they were not successful, but that was the first reaction of the Jewish communities, to put themselves under the protection of the local bishop, who in each case tried to protect them. So there were abuses. The Pope, it was clear that the crusade would arouse passions, and there was a risk that they would commit injustices. But that part of unjust violence, it was not willed by the popes. It took place in spite of their specific prohibition. But the popes ultimately judged that the good that was sought by the crusade was greater than the risk of violence which it entailed, especially given the fact that these same warriors would be fighting each other and killing Christians if they weren't sent off to the Holy Land. So there was a danger there. Almost certainly there would be some innocent people killed, but innocent people were being killed anyway, and so the popes wanted to use this military power to do something good. We should also understand that the cross and the crescent, Christianity and Islam, were at war in Spain and in the Middle East, and they would remain at war for centuries longer. It was an ongoing war. The only reason the Crusades stand out is because the church actually got involved. But if it weren't for that, it would be just a minor blimp in this long 1,000-year war. The Crusaders committed atrocities, and so did the Muslims. It's not really very useful to compare, because on both sides you find noble conduct, and on both sides you find extremism. So selective history is not, if you ever read a book about this, you have to choose a good book, because it's very easy to take certain episodes from one side and make it look as though one side was horrible and committing atrocities and the other ones were saints. Well, it's not true. If you read through the history of the Crusades, there's atrocities on both sides and noble conduct on both sides. So there's no point in trying to make that comparison.